By the time the auctioneer raised his gavel beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Larsen ballroom, Karen Larsen's vision had already begun to narrow at the edges. It was hunger first, clean, bright hunger that made the gold filigree on the mirrors seem to shiver. Hunger and the whalebone pressure of stays laced too tightly by her stepmother's maid on Lady Larsen's orders. "So she stands correctly." Then came the hand at her wrist, gloved in pearl grey kid, fingers pressing just hard enough to leave pain hidden where no one could see. "Stand straighter," Lady Larsen murmured from behind her fan, smiling at a baronet across the room. "For once in your life, try to look grateful." Grateful for being displayed in her father's house like imported porcelain. Karen kept her spine rigid and did not look down. She had learned, in the 2 years since Captain Henrik Larsen was lowered into frozen ground, that humiliation came in layers. First the command, then the obedience, and finally the expectation that one would thank the hand that forced it. She had submitted to the first two often enough. She refused the third. Music from the quartet drifted through the room, polished and expensive, as footmen moved among clusters of gentlemen balancing crystal and speculation. The Larsen name still opened doors in the city, though everyone knew the fortunes tied to northern shipping had thinned after 3 bad winters. Karen heard snatches of conversation beneath the murmur of silk and cufflinks. "Timber contracts in Narvik. If Larsen docks are leveraged again. Poor widow, such burdens." Lady Larsen accepted sympathy like tribute. In black satin and jet beads, she played bereavement with impeccable timing. No one mentioned that grief had not prevented her from dismissing half the household, selling Karen's mother's pianoforte, and moving Karen from her old rooms to a narrow attic chamber under the eaves. No one mentioned that the poor widow kept her late husband's daughter scrubbing hearth grates before dawn and balancing household books by candle end after midnight. Karen had once corrected a solicitor in front of guests for misreading one of her father's manifests. She had been 16 and proud of being useful. Her father had laughed afterward, warm and rough-voiced, and kissed the top of her head. "Good," he had said. "Always know the numbers. Men will forgive beauty for ignorance. They never forgive a woman who catches them lying." After he died, Lady Larsen began calling Karen plain, at first lightly with a sympathetic tilt of the head, then with insistence as though repetition might turn fact from fiction. "You have your father's seriousness, my dear. Not your mother's prettiness. Do not wear blue, Karen. It sharpens your severity. It is fortunate you're sensible. Plain, plain, plain," until the words settled around her like ash. Yet, even now, in the ballroom's reflected blaze, men glanced back at her, and then away too quickly. It was not admiration exactly. Something in her unsettled them. Perhaps the dark braid coiled low at her neck. Perhaps the wide-set grey eyes that missed little. Perhaps merely the impertinence of a woman who watched while others performed. She had never been good at performing. At the far end of the room, a temporary dais had been erected, draped in burgundy velvet. Silver trays had already passed through the first lots. French clocks, carved walnut cabinets, a set of marine chronometers from her father's office that Karen had memorized by touch as a child. Each item departed to applause too thin to be sincere. This was called an estate auction, but the guests were not here for furniture. They were here to smell weakness and decide how much it might cost. Mr. Bellamy, the auctioneer, dabbed his forehead and announced another lot in a voice trained to manufacture excitement. Lady Larsen's hand tightened again around Karen's wrist. "Remember," she whispered, "a signature can rescue a family or destroy one." Karen did not answer. Lady Larsen had repeated the same warning for months whenever Karen asked to review her father's debt papers herself. Too complex, the widow would sigh. Too many legal entanglements. You would only distress yourself. Yet she never ceased pressing documents beneath Karen's hand. Renewals, extensions, guarantees, all urgent, all blurred by haste. Karen had signed only 2, and only after copying every line in secret for later comparison. Lady Larson had called her ungrateful for caution. Sir Percival Dunn had called her stubborn and laughed as if he admired it. Sir Percival was in the ballroom tonight, broad-shouldered and blonde, and polished enough to pass in any drawing-room. He stood near the dais with 2 other men whose fortunes were rumoured to be made mostly of borrowed coin and unpaid promises. When Karen's gaze met his smile thinned. He raised his glass in a mock salute. A chill slid through her despite the heat. The gavel struck. Applause stirred and died. Bellamy cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we come now to our final lot of the evening, recently added at the executrix's direction." A small ripple ran through the crowd, interest quickening, shoulders turning. Lady Larson released Karen's wrist at last and stepped forward, veil gleaming like spun smoke under candlelight. "As my late husband's widow and guardian of his household interests," she said, her voice carrying with practised sorrow, "I am obliged to satisfy certain outstanding obligations in a manner most efficient and honourable." Karen's stomach dropped. Guardian? She had never been declared incompetent. She was of age. She opened her mouth, but Lady Larson lifted one elegant hand, and the room waited, complicit in its own curiosity. "Therefore," the widow continued, "by private arrangement with key creditors, I offer one final settlement instrument, the hand of Miss Karen Larson in marriage, to be claimed by the gentleman who tenders the greatest discharge of the estate's debt." For one suspended second there was no sound at all. Then laughter cracked through the ballroom, nervous from some, delighted from others. Someone muttered, "Good God!" Another said, "Can she do that?" A third answered, "If paper says so, anything can be done." Karen stared at her stepmother, unable to make sense of the words. Offer, hand, claimed, as if she were linen sold by the yard. "I do not consent," she said, and was proud that her voice did not shake. Bellamy gave a helpless glance toward Lady Larson. The widow's smile never moved. "Miss Larson is overwrought. Mr. Bellamy?" The auctioneer, pale, lifted his docket. "Opening bid at 10,000 in debt discharge." "15!" called a man near the fireplace. 18, said another. Sir Percival Dunn did not hurry. He waited until the murmurs rose, then said with smooth assurance, 25,000 with immediate assumption of all dock liens. Heads turned, pens scratched. Someone clapped. Karen took one step backward, then another, breath catching halfway down her throat. The chandeliers multiplied into broken halos. She heard her own pulse like distant surf. Her corset felt like an iron band. "You cannot," she tried, but the words dissolved. Lady Larson hissed without moving her lips, "Do not make a spectacle, girl." A spectacle, an annuity for Lady Larson's comfort. An annuity for Lady Larson's comfort. A small approving murmur passed through the crowd. Businesslike, efficient, even generous. Karen's hands went cold. She looked for a single face that held outrage instead of appetite, and found none she trusted. Men she had known since childhood would not meet her eyes. One of them, Mr. Havers from the docks, who had once accepted Christmas pudding at her father's table, shrugged as if to say such arrangements were regrettable but practical. Legal route to dock shares, she realised dimly. Once married, her inheritance would pass under her husband's control. They were not bidding for a wife, they were bidding for maritime access. She drew breath and found no air. The floor tilted. Candlelight stretched into bright threads and snapped. 32! 35! The gavel rose. The room tipped sideways. Her knees buckled. She felt the world rush upward to meet her, and then there was only darkness and the taste of metal on her tongue. When sound returned, it came in fragments. A woman crying out, the scrape of chairs, Bellamy stammering, my lord, please." Karen opened her eyes to a black coat, a hard line of jaw, and the steady rhythm of someone else's heartbeat beneath her cheek. She was cradled against a broad chest, one arm under her shoulders, one beneath her knees, as if she weighed nothing at all. Lord Ashcombe. She knew him by reputation before she knew his face. Elias Grant, Duke of Ashcombe, soldier, strategist, survivor of a campaign that had left half his regiment in graves and the other half loyal unto death. In society he was spoken of as if he were weather, unavoidable, severe, not to be trifled with. He almost never attended these mercantile gatherings. He disliked spectacle, and society disliked being unable to read him. Now his mouth was a flat line, eyes like storm slate as he looked over her head at the dais. "She is not for sale," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words struck the ballroom like steel on stone. Lady Larson fluttered forward, colour high in her cheeks. "Your Grace, this is a private family settlement. You have no standing here." "I have standing enough to stop a crime in progress." Ashcombe's gaze never left hers. "Stand aside. You cannot remove her. I am her guardian. She is 22. Under contract as a security against debt. Produce it in court," he said, "not in a marketplace." Sir Percival stepped in with a conciliatory smile that did not reach his eyes. "Surely we need not dramatise a lawful understanding. Miss Larson will recover. She may choose calmly in the morning." Karen managed through the spinning in her head. "I choose now. No." Ashcombe looked down at her, then, briefly, something unreadable moved across his face. Anger, yes, but not at her. "Very well," he said, and turned. A few men moved as if to block him. None did. Rank had its own momentum. The crowd parted. Scandal and fascination mingled in every stare. Karen caught sight of Lady Larson's expression over Ashcombe's shoulder. Not grief, not concern, but naked fury. Outside, night air struck cold against Karen's skin. Ashcombe's carriage waited at the curb, crest half obscured by lamplight. He set her down only long enough for the footman to open the door, then climbed in opposite, jaw set, gloved hands clasped so tightly the leather creaked. For several streets neither spoke. Wheels rattled over cobblestones, and London's lights passed in wavering bands across his face. At last Karen said, hoarse, "You did not ask where I wished to go." His eyes flicked to hers. "Would you prefer I return you?" "No." "Then forgive the presumption." "I do not know where we are going." "To my sister's house in Brook Street first," he said. "If she is in town, you will stay under her roof tonight. If she is not, my townhouse has a full female staff, and Mrs. Dalrymple is housekeeper. You will not be unchaperoned." The careful formality of it made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Even now he was building propriety around her like walls. "Why?" she asked. "Because what occurred was indefensible. That is a principle, not a reason." A muscle in his jaw shifted. "At present, Miss Larson, it is the reason you are getting." She might have snapped at him on another night. Instead, she leaned back, closing her eyes against the carriage sway. "Then thank you for your principle." By morning, London had turned the night into breakfast entertainment. At Lady Fenwick's table in Mayfair, they said Karen had engineered a fainting fit to trap a duke. In St. James's clubs, they said Ashcombe had developed a taste for melodrama and distressed brunettes. In counting houses near the river, they said Lady Larson had been robbed by sentiment of a prudent settlement. In every version, the private auction was deplorable in theory, and delicious in detail. A boy with ink-stained fingers sold broadsheets at the corner of Brook Street shouting, "Duke disrupts marriage sale! Merchant's daughter swoons in scandal scene!" Karen watched from behind Lady Helena Ashcombe's drawing-room curtains while the household pretended not to notice. Helena, widowed, sharp-minded and mercifully uninterested in gossip as religion, had greeted Karen at dawn with tea, dry stockings, and one sentence that felt like a hand offered over deep water. "You are safe here until we decide otherwise. We, not I. Not you must." Karen had nearly wept from the simple civility of it. By noon, a solicitor's note arrived, sealed in black wax with Lady Larson's crest. Helena broke it, read silently, then passed it to Karen. The language was all velvet threat. Lady Larson demanded Karen's immediate return to the Larson house as ward and dependent under an existing debt instrument, naming her person and marital future as security. Should Karen refuse, Lady Larson would petition Chancery for enforcement and seek medical confinement on grounds of female instability and recent hysterical collapse. To avoid public ugliness, Karen need only accept a reasonable offer of matrimony from Sir Percival Dunn, whose terms remained magnanimous. Karen read it twice, each line colder than the last. "They mean to cage you with paperwork," Helena said quietly. "It is uglier than chains, and often stronger." Ashcombe stood near the mantel, expression unreadable. He had arrived an hour earlier and spoken mostly to his sister in low tones. He did not hover near Karen, did not offer comforting platitudes, did not call her brave. He simply asked, "Do you have independent counsel?" "My father's solicitor retired to Kent. Lady Larson dismissed his clerk." Karen folded the letter with precise fingers. "I have no one who is mine." "You do now," Helena said. Ashcombe's gaze shifted to Karen. "Mr. Hale will review the instrument this afternoon. Until then you leave this house only with escort." The command in his tone struck sparks along her nerves. "I am not your recruit, Your Grace." "No," he said, unruffled, "but you are presently a target." She held his eyes. "Protection is not possession. I have had enough of men confusing the two." Something hard flickered in his face, as if she had struck somewhere already bruised. "Noted." Helena cut between them with seasoned ease. "Excellent. Since we are all determined to be insufferable, let us apply it to useful work. Karen, what do you need most?" "Numbers," Karen thought immediately. "Proof, not sympathy." "My father kept duplicate ledgers," she said slowly. "Shipping debt, dock liens, private notes. Lady Larson said they were lost when the library was reorganised, but I copied portions years ago. If I can compare dates and signatures, I may show alteration." Ashcombe spoke before Helena could. "I have Larson's shipping abstracts in my commercial archive. Your father and mine shared insurers on 2 routes. You may examine them." She looked at him, surprised despite herself. "Why would you keep our records?" "Because I do not invest blind." "Then you believe there is fraud?" "I believe people who attempt to auction women rarely stop at one species of crime." For the first time since last night, a thin, sharp smile touched Karen's mouth. "On that point, Your Grace, we agree entirely." Outside, carriage wheels hissed through winter slush. "Fire!" Karen set Lady Larson's letter on fire. Karen set Lady Larson's letter on the table beside a fresh sheet of paper and began to write a list in her father's old method. Claim, source, discrepancy, proof. If they meant to sell her future by line item, she would answer in the same language, only better. If they meant to sell her future by line item, she would answer in the same language, only better. Karen dipped the pen again, blotted once, and continued. Claim, Miss K. Larson pledged as marital security. Source: instrument dated March, signed L. Larson, K. Larson. Discrepancy: no prior debt schedule attached in copy. Proof needed: original schedule, witness names, bank receipts. Across from her, Helena watched with narrowed approval, as if measuring steel quality. Ashcombe did not sit. He stood at the hearth, shoulders square, one hand resting on the mantel in a posture that looked less like ease than readiness. A knock sounded. Helena's butler admitted a spare, dark-coated gentleman carrying a leather case. "Mr. Hale," Ashcombe said. Hale bowed to Helena first, then to Karen with formal gravity. "Miss Larson." He accepted the folded letter Karen handed him, read it quickly, and made a small, displeased sound through his nose. "Lady Larson has retained Pritchard and Vane. Aggressive firm. Fond of technical traps." "Can she force me back into that house?" Karen asked. "Force? Not today." Hale opened his case and took out spectacles. "Compel appearance in Chancery for determination of wardship and enforceability? Yes, particularly if she persuades a judge that your interests are endangered by improper influence in a bachelor duke's orbit." Helena gave a dry laugh. "Improper influence appears to be whatever men dislike." Hale allowed himself half a smile. "Often so." He set the letter down and steepled his fingers. "The instrument language is unusual, but not impossible. If Miss Larson signed it knowingly—" "I did not," Karen said. "I signed 2 extensions under protest. Neither included marriage terms. Then we attack validity by fraud, concealment, and unlawful consideration." Hale's gaze sharpened. "But we must prove it. Suspicion alone fails in Chancery. Paper defeats outrage every time." "Then we gather paper," Karen said. Ashcombe straightened from the mantel. "My archive. Now." His townhouse in Grosvenor Square was the opposite of the Larson ballroom. Controlled rather than ornate, quiet rather than glittering. Dark wood, clean lines, staff who moved efficiently and did not stare. Helena came too, declaring she refused to let 2 stubborn people ruin a legal strategy through pride and bad tea. She established herself in a morning room with correspondence and knitting she never once looked at, and from there directed the household like a benign admiral. Ashcombe led Karen down a back corridor to the library annex, where commercial waited under 2 green-shaded lamps, These are insurer abstracts, doc manifests, and payment ledgers copied from partner houses, he said. Larson entries are in the Baltic files, red tabs. Karen stepped into the room as if into a chapel. "I will require privacy to work," she said. "You will have it. Mrs. Dalrymple will bring food whether you remember to eat or not." She almost retorted that she was not a child, then remembered she had fainted from hunger in public less than 12 hours earlier, and swallowed the pride. "Thank you." His nod was brief. "If you need a clerk to copy, ask. Do not lift the map drawers alone. They stick." Then he was gone, boots receding down the hall. By late afternoon, the table was crowded with opened volumes, weighted pages, and Karen's increasingly dense notes. Her methods settled quickly. Identify debt listed by Lady Larson's letter, locate corresponding route records, trace payment status through insurer settlements, then compare dates with signatures on the 2 documents she had signed last autumn. Twice she found interest calculations that could not possibly stand. Once she found a lien that had been marked disputed in one house and absolute in another. Sloppiness or manipulation, either would help. A light knock came at the open door. Took one step in, caught his sleeve on the door and fell back. The door slammed shut. He was alone. 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 He took one step in, caught his sleeve on the door latch, and nearly dropped the pot. Karen was up before porcelain hit wood. She caught the tray edge. Hot tea sloshed over the rim and onto the boy's wrist. He gasped and jerked back, tray clattering but intact. "I'm sorry, miss. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Hush." Karen set the tray down and took his wrist gently. The skin was already reddening. "What is your name?" "Tom, miss." "Tom, we are going to run this under cool water now, and then you are going to stop apologizing for being burned." His eyes widened as if this were unprecedented logic. In the scullery she found Mrs. Dalrymple, who produced salve and clean linen with military speed. Tom stood stiff as a pike while Karen wrapped his wrist. "Can you wiggle your fingers?" He did. "Yes, miss." "Good. No blisters yet. Keep it cool for an hour." She tipped her head. "And next time, put the tray down before you panic." A reluctant smile twitched at his mouth. "Yes, miss." As she turned to leave, voices drifted through the half-open servants' hall door. Two maids speaking in low excitement. "The auction girl, that's her. His Grace carried her like a bride. Cook says cook should mind her onions," Mrs. Dalrymple barked without looking up. Silence snapped shut. Karen expected embarrassment to sting. It did, briefly. Then it hardened into something else. Let them talk. They always had. Numbers remained indifferent to gossip. When she returned to the archive, Ashcombe was standing by her table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, reading one of her columns upside down. "You organise evidence like an artillery ledger," he said. "My father said arithmetic is merely truth with better handwriting." He set the page down. "Tom, 1st-degree burn. Pride injury worse." A flicker at the corner of his mouth suggested approval. "You were gone 10 minutes and acquired clinical command." Someone had to." He looked as if he might answer more, then didn't. "Hale has sent word. Petition filed by Lady Larson this evening. Emergency hearing request in 3 days. 3, Karen sat, pulse kicking once hard. Then we do not sleep. They did sleep eventually, but not much. The next day unfolded in layers of pressure. At 10, Hale arrived with copied pleadings from Chancery. Lady Larson's counsel described Karen as impressionable, subject to episodes of collapse, and presently lodged under the influence of a nobleman with active commercial interest, adverse to the Larson estate. Hale translated without mercy. They would paint her as unstable, and Ashcombe as opportunistic. "Can they confine me?" Karen asked. "Temporarily, if they secure a physician willing to certify nerves, hysteria, disordered judgment?" Hale's mouth tightened. "It has been done for less." Helena slammed her teacup down. "I should like a statute permitting the confinement of men for arrogance." Hale coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. "Until Parliament improves, we require documents." By noon, Sir Percival Dunn sent roses the colour of bruises, and a note in heavy script. "My dear Miss Larson, public dispute need not become personal distress. Accept my protection, and all unpleasant proceedings cease. I remain, as ever, ready to rescue you from those who profit by your agitation." Karen dropped the note into the fire. The roses she gave to the kitchen for rosewater because waste offended her. At 2, he arrived in person. Karen saw his carriage from the library window and went still. Ashcombe, summoned by a footman, said only, "Stay here." He left before she could argue. She did not obey. She moved to the gallery above the front hall, where the balustrade screens gave partial view without being seen. Sir Percival stood below in a dove-grey coat, handsome as a coin, and just as sincere. "I came to settle this civilly," he was saying. "Miss Larson is being encouraged into litigation that will destroy her prospects." Ashcombe's voice was level. "Her prospects are not your property. My claim is lawful. Your claim is carrion, a beat." Percival's smile sharpened. "Take care, Ashcombe. Men will wonder why you involve yourself so deeply in a merchant girl's affairs. Let them. I bid in good faith. You bid on a human being." Silence stretched. Then Percival gave a short, unpleasant laugh. "Idealism from a duke! How fashionable!" He lowered his voice, but Karen still heard it. She signed. She can deny tears, not ink. Ashcombe stepped closer, not touching, yet somehow making the hall smaller. "Leave." Percival held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then inclined his head with mock courtesy and turned on his heel. At the door he barked at the footman for opening it too slowly, all polish gone in an instant. Karen exhaled only when the carriage wheels faded. She found Ashcombe in the library a quarter-hour later, staring at nothing, fists flexing once at his sides before stillness returned like armour sliding into place. "You should not have listened from the gallery," he said, without turning. "You should not give orders to a woman you are not commanding in battle." His eyes closed briefly, as if fending off either anger or fatigue. "Did you hear enough?" "Yes." She set a ledger on the table between them. "Including the part where he trusts ink more than tears. I agree with him." That drew his gaze. "You agree with Dunn?" "I agree that paper wins, which is why we will beat him with it." For the first time in 2 days he gave her a look that was almost direct respect, not guarded obligation. "Then show me." They bent over the books until dusk. Karen traced shipment codes. Ashcombe pulled corresponding insurance settlements from separate cabinets. Twice he corrected her assumption about naval convoy delays. Twice she corrected his reading of dock labour charges. Their competence meshed cleanly, infuriatingly intimate, in a way that had nothing to do with touch. And still he kept emotional distance like a trench line. By evening they had built a promising chain. Debts, allegedly outstanding in Lady Larson's instrument, had in fact been partially discharged through a winter timber insurance payout, but partially would not void a contract. They needed absolute settlement or proof the marriage clause had been inserted later. They found neither. At midnight, Hale sent a runner with worse news. Pritchard and Vane had produced witness affidavits claiming Karen had verbally accepted Sir Percival's suit months earlier. 2 witnesses were men who drank at Percival's club. "Purchase testimony," Helena muttered. "Testimony nonetheless," Hale replied. "Judges dislike scandal and uncertainty. If we arrive with ambiguity, they may order temporary guardianship while facts are sorted. Temporary can last years." After he left, silence filled the library like smoke. Karen sat very straight, hands flat on the table. "If they confine me even for a month, Lady Larson can bleed the estate dry before ruling." Ashcombe stood by the window, profile cut in lamplight, distant as carved stone. "Then we do not let it happen." "How?" Her voice cracked before she could stop it. "We have fragments, not a blade." He did not answer at once. When he did, his tone was cool enough to frost glass. "You are exhausted. Go to bed." She stared at him, incredulous. "Do not dismiss me like a servant. I am trying to keep you upright for hearing." "I did not ask you to keep me. I asked you to fight beside me." That landed. His jaw tightened. "I am fighting. From behind a wall." Something flashed in his eyes. Hurt, maybe quickly shuttered. "Good night, Miss Larson." He left before she could say anything she might regret. Karen stood alone among ledgers and lamp smoke, until the candles guttered low. Then she did what she had done since childhood, when frightened. She worked. Sometime after 2, while cross-checking an insurer index for the 3rd time, she noticed a notation she had overlooked because it was filed under Grant Consolidated Maritime, not Larson. HL Private Code Reference transferred 12th January, witnessed CBHL, Henrik Larson. Her pulse kicked. She pulled the corresponding folio from a back shelf labelled Deeds, Escrowed Instruments. Most entries were tied packets with wax seals. Midway down sat a thin wrapped bundle marked in an unfamiliar clerk's hand. Larson's Supplemental Papers, received by E.G. Grant per instruction of H. Larson. The seal was cracked with age. Karen's fingers trembled once, then steadied. She untied the ribbon. Inside lay 3 sheets, a debt reconciliation table in her father's angular script, a signed acknowledgement from North Baltic underwriters of full payment received 2 years prior, and a codicil attached to his will, witnessed by Charles Bentinck, C.B., former senior clerk at the Admiralty Courts. She read the codicil once, then again aloud, barely above a whisper, to be sure her mind was not inventing salvation. "I hereby direct that all residual shares in Larson Dock and Shipping be held in trust for my daughter, Karen Elin Larson, to vest solely in her hand upon her completing the age of 23 years. No guardian, spouse, or creditor shall alienate, encumber, or bargain said interest by proxy of marriage." She stopped, breathless. No guardian, no creditor, no bargain by marriage. Lady Larson's entire spectacle had not merely been monstrous, it had been illegal on its face. Karen gathered the papers and all but ran from the archive, skirts in fists, slippers soundless on corridor runner. She found Ashcombe in his study, coat discarded, cravat loosened, a decanter untouched beside him as he read dispatches under a single lamp. He rose instantly at her expression. "What happened?" She set the pages before him. "Read." He scanned the first sheet, then the second, then slowed at the codicil. The room seemed to contract around the silence. When he looked up, the restraint was gone from his face. In its place was something rawer, fiercer. "Where did you find these?" "In your escrow folios. My father lodged them with yours." Her laugh came sharp with disbelief. "He anticipated trouble. He hid the knife where Lady Larson could not reach." Ashcombe read the codicil again, fingertip resting on the keyline. "This voids her security claim. If validly attached to the will record, it destroys Dunn's position entirely. It is witnessed by Bentinck. Hale can authenticate in the morning." Karen drew a long breath that felt like surf breaking after a storm. "I am not collateral, legally or otherwise." "No," he said quietly. "You are not." The words settled between them, heavier than triumph. Karen watched him across the desk. "Why did this enrage you so much, at the ballroom, before you knew any of this? Why did it look personal?" He went very still. "You owe me no confession," she added, softer. "But do not pretend this is only principle." A long pause, and then he sat, not from ease, but as if choosing not to flee standing up. "My mother was 19 when my grandfather traded her into marriage to settle entail disputes," he said. No drama in his voice, just fact cut clean. "Excellent bloodline, damaged accounts. She became the bridge between them. My father was not cruel, merely convenient. She called it being purchased politely." Karen did not move. "She taught me accounts because she said numbers were the bars on her cage." His mouth tightened. "When she died, I swore I would never make affection another transaction, never ask, never offer where power could contaminate consent." Understanding came like a cold, clear bell. "So you built distance and called it honour?" "Yes." "And last night? I saw men bid on you as if reading horseflesh, and He broke off, jaw hard. "I forgot restraint." Karen stepped closer to the desk, papers clutched in her hand. "Restraint is not the same as righteousness, Your Grace. Freezing your feelings may keep your hands clean, but it leaves the field to people like Lady Larson and Dunn. They are delighted when decent men retreat." His gaze lifted to hers, unguarded for once. "You think me a coward?" "I think you wounded," she said, "and mistaking absence for virtue." He looked as if she had struck true and deep. For several heartbeats neither spoke. Then Ashcombe rose, slower this time, and held out his hand, not to claim, not to direct, simply open between them. "What do you intend now, Miss Larson?" She placed the codicil in that offered hand, not relinquishing it until his fingers closed with hers around the page. "Now," she said, voice steady as iron, "I stop defending myself as a frightened ward. I appear in Chancery as heir, claimant and witness. We don't ask them to spare me. We prove they cannot own me." A breath, almost a smile at the corner of his mouth, grim, admiring. "As you wish," he said. "For once," Karen answered. "Exactly as I wish." "For once," Karen answered. "Exactly as I wish." A hard rap sounded at the study door almost at once, as if the house itself had been listening. Ashcombe released the paper and crossed the room. His valet stood outside, hair hastily combed, expression grim. "Beg pardon, Your Grace. Mr. Hale has come back. Says it cannot wait." "Send him in." Hale entered, carrying his case and a damp cloak, rain darkening the shoulders. He looked from Karen's face to the document in Ashcombe's hand, and stilled. "That," he said very quietly, "is either our salvation or a very elaborate noose." "May I?" Karen handed him the codicil, then the underwriter's acknowledgement and reconciliation table. Hale read each line twice, lips moving slightly over names and dates. "Bentinck as witness," he murmured, "and Henrik's own hand beyond any question." He looked up, and the usually measured solicitor allowed himself a flash of fierce satisfaction. If this codicil is enrolled with the will record, Lady Larson's debt marriage scheme is dead. If, Ashcombe said. Hale's expression sobered. Yes, if we authenticate at first light, tonight we lock this in your strongbox, and no one outside this room knows where it came from. Too late. Another knock. Sharper, official. The butler appeared with a folded card on a tray, and an expression that meant trouble had already entered the front hall. Mr. Ellery from the Evening Register, Your Grace, and a constable from Bow Street, sir. They both insist. Hale swore under his breath. Ashcombe's eyes hardened. Constable first. Constable Reed was broad-shouldered, hat in hand, discomfort written plainly across his face. He produced a paper sealed with a magistrate's stamp. Your Grace, Miss Larson, I'm instructed to serve notice of complaint filed by Lady Larson and Mr. Dunn. He cleared his throat. Allegation of theft and tampering with testamentary papers belonging to the Larson estate. Further allegation that Miss Larson, while in a state of mental agitation, is being induced to execute fraudulent claims under undue influence. Karen felt her blood go cold, then hot. Undue influence. Of course, Reed continued, avoiding her eyes. Pending inquiry, any relevant estate papers are to be surrendered to the registry office by noon tomorrow. And, Miss... He hesitated. There is also a petition for medical examination of your faculties to determine capacity before hearing. Helena, who had come in silently behind him, said with lethal calm, By whose physician? Dr. Swithin Harrow, ma'am. Named by petitioner. Hale stepped forward. We will contest both motions immediately. You may, sir. I only carry. Reed shifted his weight. Off the record, miss. They're moving quick and dirty. I'd advise you do the same. When he had gone, the study felt smaller. Ashcombe broke the silence. Ellery, the butler inclined his head. Still waiting, Your Grace. Also 2 other newspapermen at the gate. Hale rubbed his forehead. They're building public narrative before court. Hysterical girl. Ambitious duke. Forged codicil. If she's painted unstable and dishonest, even genuine documents will be viewed as contaminated. Karen stared at the sealed notice in her hands. Lady Larson had not merely defended herself, she had attacked every pillar Karen stood on. Character, sanity, evidence, venue. What happens if they win this motion? She asked. Hale did not soften it. Your testimony discounted, your papers impounded, a guardian appointed temporarily over your person and property. In practice, Lady Larson and Dunn control your estate while litigation drags. They can settle assets, marry you off, under court blessing, and call it protection. Ashcombe's voice was quiet and dangerous. Not while I breathe. Hale met his gaze. Then breathe usefully, Your Grace. We need affidavits by dawn, registrar verification at opening, and a neutral physician to counter Harrow. Also, he tapped the complaint, we cannot appear to hide papers. We surrender copies and file motion to inspect originals under seal. Karen squared her shoulders. No copies. We surrender originals to registry ourselves with receipt and witness signatures from your clerk and mine. Hale gave a short nod. Good. Chain of custody. Ashcombe looked to Karen. You should rest. No, she said. I should write. She sat at the desk and began, not waiting for permission. Affidavit of discovery, statement of prior coercion, recollection of documents signed and withheld. Hale dictated structure. Karen supplied facts with surgical precision. Ashcombe wrote his own declaration as receiving party and custodian. Helena added one as chaperone attesting Karen's condition and conduct since arrival. Lucid, methodical, fully self-directed. By the time dawn greyed the study windows, they had 6 signed statements, 3 copies sealed, and ink on their fingers like battle paint. Rain had turned to sleet by morning, needling carriage roofs as they drove to the registry office near Doctors' Commons. Hale carried the codicil packet inside his coat. Ashcombe rode opposite Karen, saying little, his stillness more taut than calm. The registry clerk on duty was young and pink-eyed, with sleep deprivation. He brightened when he saw Ashcombe, dimmed when he saw Hale's papers, and paled entirely when he read Lady Larson's complaint attached beneath. "We require inspection of Captain Henrik Larson's will packet and enrolled codicils," Hale said. "Now," the clerk swallowed, "Senior Registrar must authorise sealed estate access." "Then fetch him." They waited in a corridor that smelled of damp wool and old vellum. 2 reporters loitered at the far end, pretending to read notices. Karen ignored them and counted breaths. At last the senior registrar arrived, Mr. Penfold, narrow-faced, immaculate with the brittle politeness of a man who disliked surprises. He reviewed their petition, frowned at the attached complaint, and led them into a records room watched by 2 assistants. "Larson file, probate year 18, he ordered. Boxes were brought, seals checked, string untied. Penfold lifted the will, turned pages, paused. His brows drew together. "Is there a problem?" Hale asked. Penfold turned the document toward them. Near the back, between 2 intact leaves, one section had been cut out cleanly at the stitching, leaving a ragged hinge of paper and a gap where an annex should have been. "Codicil slot is empty," Penfold said flatly. Karen felt the floor shift under her feet, though she did not move. "Empty?" According to margin notation, a supplemental codicil was lodged and witnessed. Penfold tapped the faded line. "But the sheet is missing." Hale's voice sharpened. "Since when?" Penfold stiffened. "I cannot say without audit. You will conduct one. I will conduct what procedure allows." Hale produced the codicil from his case with deliberate care. "Then compare this original against your register notation." Penfold reached for it, then drew his hand back as if burned. "Under active fraud complaint, I cannot examine disputed paper without court direction." "Court direction," Hale nearly barked a laugh. "By then evidence may conveniently vanish, as this did." One of the assistants shifted, eyes darting to the door. Penfold ignored him. "I will issue receipt for tender under seal." "And if it disappears too?" Karen asked. Penfold's face closed. "Miss Larson, mind your implication." "My implication is that my father's codicil was physically cut from an enrolled will packet under your roof." Silence slammed down. Even the reporters at the corridor end leaned closer. Ashcombe stepped forward half a pace, not touching her, simply there. "Issue the receipt," he said. Penfold did, each stroke of his pen too neat. Hale watched the sealing wax as if memorizing the exact drip. Karen signed transfer with a hand that did not shake until afterward. As they turned to leave, a messenger in Larson livery appeared, breathless at the doorway, holding another folded order. "For Miss Larson, immediate service." Hale snatched it first, scanned, and went white with anger. "Ex parte medical directive granted," he said. "You are to present this afternoon to Dr. Harrow for capacity examination. Failure to appear may be construed as proof of instability and contempt." Karen took the paper. At the bottom was Lady Larson's precise signature, and below it, Sir Percival's. Ashcombe's voice dropped. "Can we block it?" "Not before this afternoon." Hale spoke through clenched teeth. "We can send our own physician and challenge admissibility later. But if she refuses entirely, they will call it hysteria confirming itself." "What if Harrow lies?" Karen asked. "He will." Then we walk into his room with witnesses, a stenographer, and no private consultation, she said. Hale blinked. You may not demand. I may, and be refused on record. Her chin lifted. Let him deny transparency in front of neutral observers. For a second, Hale looked almost startled into admiration. Very well, I'll arrange it. They made 3 steps toward the outer door before a court officer blocked their path and bowed stiffly. Miss Larson, Your Grace, by instruction of Chancery, you are both summoned to appear tomorrow morning, first call, for preliminary determination on fraud and guardianship motions. Matter advanced due to public disturbance. Tomorrow, less than 24 hours. No codicil in hand. Missing registry page. Hostile physician by afternoon. The noose had tightened. Harrow's consulting rooms in Cavendish Square were upholstered to suggest gentility and control. Soft carpets, framed botanical prints, curtains drawn against weather, as though weather itself were indecent. Hale had managed to secure 2 observers, a neutral physician recommended by Helena, Dr. Niazi, and a stenographer from Lincoln's Inn, who looked terrified but determined. Harrow did not hide his irritation at witnesses. This is highly irregular, he said, fingertips pressed together. Mental assessment requires candour. Karen sat upright in the chair opposite. Then let us be candid in company. He smiled without warmth. Very well. The examination began with banalities and slid quickly into traps. Had she experienced palpitations, crying spells, disobedience, agitation? Had she refused prudent marital offers despite financial necessity? Did she entertain delusions of persecution by her lawful guardian? Did she harbour inappropriate attachment to the Duke of Ashcombe? Hale objected twice. Harrow overruled as if presiding judge. Karen answered each question with exactness, refusing the emotional bait. Then Harrow changed tactics. You fainted publicly, he said, studying her like specimen glass. Do you deny constitutional female weakness? I deny that assault by auction is a constitutional condition. One corner of Dr. Niazi's mouth twitched. Harrow went cold. You display argumentative mania. I display vocabulary. He ended the interview 20 minutes later and withdrew to compose findings. They were made to wait in a side room where rain ticked at the panes like impatient fingers. When he returned, he handed Hale a folded summary. Patient exhibits heightened oppositional temperament, fixation on legal abstractions, an impaired submissive judgment toward rightful authority. Recommending temporary supervision by designated guardian pending stabilisation. Karen took the page and read it once. The words might as well have been shackles. Hale swore outright this time. Dr. Niazi said crisply, I dissent and will append independent assessment. Harrow shrugged. Append what you like. Petitioner requested my opinion. I have given it. By the time they left, dusk had fallen and sleet had become hard snow. Carriage lamps smeared the streets in yellow streaks. Karen sat rigid all the way back to Grosvenor Square, Harrow's report folded in her glove like poison. Inside the house, she climbed the stairs without waiting for maid or tea or comfort. In the library, she shut the door, braced both hands on the table, and finally let herself shake. She had done everything right. Found evidence, kept records, spoken clearly. And still men with seals and polished voices could slice pages from archives, name obedience as sanity, and call her resistance a disease. For one dangerous minute, doubt flooded in. What if they are too strong? What if the paper can always be purchased faster than truth can be proved? What if father hid the knife and it still was not enough? A soft knock came. She did not answer. The door opened anyway. Helena entered carrying a tray that held brandy broth and 2 spoons. "I am not hungry," Karen said. Marvellous! Then this is entirely symbolic. Helena set the tray down and sat opposite. Drink. Karen obeyed because defiance suddenly required energy she did not have. Helena waited until she had swallowed twice. You are not failing because wicked people are efficient. Karen laughed once. Brittle. I am failing because the codicil vanished in their custody within hours. Then we stop asking institutions to be pure and start forcing them to be observed. Helena leaned in. Tomorrow court will be crowded. Crowds are repellent but useful. Lies prefer closed rooms. Karen stared at the broth surface, at her own warped reflection. If they appoint temporary guardianship, then we appeal and make scandal costlier than justice. They may confine me first. Helena's eyes went hard as hammered metal. Not if I am breathing. In his study down the hall, Ashcombe stood alone in the dark for a long time before lighting the lamp. He had spent years mastering the art of containment, in war, in Parliament, in rooms full of men who mistook noise for power. Tonight containment felt like cowardice wearing discipline's coat. On his desk lay Harrow's report, Hale's objections, and the receipt for the surrendered codicil, sealed at registry. Facts, procedures, routes of response. He knew how to fight with those. He did not know how to absorb the look on Karen's face when she read, impaired submissive judgment. He poured brandy, did not drink it, and opened the bottom drawer instead. Inside, beneath campaign maps and old dispatches, rested a small packet tied with faded blue ribbon. His mother's letters. He had not touched them in years. The first he opened was short, written in a neat hand grown cramped near the end. Elias, men will call obedience virtue when they mean convenience. Learn the difference early. M. Another, unsent, addressed to no one. I was not beaten. I was not starved. I was merely exchanged, and everyone called it fortunate. The cage was upholstered, which made guests praise the craftsmanship. He shut his eyes. Memory came uninvited. His mother seated by a window, spine straight as a mast, fingers white around an account book she was not permitted to alter. His father saying, not unkindly, My dear, these matters are not for you. Himself, at 12, pretending not to hear her weeping behind a locked door because boys were taught to endure, not intervene. He had sworn then to want nothing he could coerce. It had seemed noble, clean, safe. But safety had edges. He had mistaken refusal to reach for refusal to abandon. Karen had said it plainly. Freezing did not make him honourable if it left others to be bargained. A knock sounded once. Helena entered without waiting. You look like a man about to duel the weather, she said. He gave a humourless breath. I am considering setting fire to Cavendish Square. Tempting, inefficient. She shut the door behind her. Say it, Elias. He stared at the letters in his hand. If I fail her tomorrow, I do to her what was done to Mother. I stand by while clever people rename captivity. Helena's expression softened, then steadied. You are not that boy at the window. No, he said. I am worse. I have power now. Then use it cleanly. She touched the ribbon packet. And stop pretending detachment protects women from men like Dunn. It protects men like you from fear. He laughed once, raw. I am afraid. Good. Fear means you understand stakes. He looked toward the door, where beyond 2 corridors Karen was likely still awake, still making lists with shaking hands, because that was how she survived terror. I want her, he said quietly. The words dragged up like confession. And I would rather cut out my own tongue than let wanting become leverage. Helena held his gaze. Then ask nothing tonight. Stand where she asks tomorrow. It is possible to love without purchase, if you remember love is not a claim. When she left, he remained still for several minutes, then gathered the papers, rang for his valet, and sent instructions into the house with military precision. Extra footmen at doors, no unscheduled callers admitted, carriage ready before dawn, Hale to arrive at first light, Dr. Niazi collected en route. Order this time in service of someone else's autonomy. The crisis came before dawn anyway. Karen had slept perhaps 2 hours in her borrowed room when pounding on the front door jolted the house awake. Voices rose below, male, official, insistent. By the time she reached the upper landing in wrapper and shawl, Ashcombe and Hale were already in the hall, Helena beside them in a dark gown, hair unpinned but eyes blazing. 2 court officers stood at the threshold with 3 burly attendants behind them, and at the curb a closed carriage with shuttered windows. The lead officer unfolded a document, warrant under emergency authority. Miss Karen Larson to be removed into protective medical supervision pending this morning's hearing, due risk of flight, self-harm and document interference. Self-harm? Helena snapped. She was asleep. Petitioner affidavit states she threatened irrational acts. I did no such thing, Karen said, descending the stairs 1 measured step at a time. The officer's gaze flicked to her, then away. Miss, I am instructed to deliver you to St. Jude's House for Females until called by court. St. Jude's, a private madhouse in Clerkenwell, notorious for admitting inconvenient wives and daughters whose signatures were needed elsewhere. Hale moved forward. This order is outrageous. Hearing is at 9. She appears directly there under my custody. Order specifies immediate transfer. Ashcombe's voice cut through low and absolute. By whose signature? The officer hesitated, then held out the paper. Hale snatched it, scanned and swore. Night magistrate ex parte. No notice to respondent. Behind the officers, snow blew sideways under the gas lamps. In the carriage across the street, Karen caught a glimpse of a familiar profile through the fogged glass. Sir Percival Dunn, waiting. Her stomach dropped and steadied in the same beat. If she went into that carriage, she might never reach court as herself. If she refused, they could drag her and call resistance proof of madness. Ashcombe took 1 step toward the officers. Hale caught his sleeve hard. Do not give them assault, for God's sake. Helena was already speaking to the second officer in a rapid, icy undertone about unlawful seizure, witnesses, Parliament questions, names in print. The man looked rattled but did not move. Karen came down the last stair and stopped on the black and white tiles, facing the warrant, the men, the waiting carriage. Miss Larson, the lead officer said, voice tightening, will you come peaceably? From outside, the church bell at St. George's struck 6, 3 hours to Chancery, 3 hours for Lady Larson's final trap to close. Karen lifted her chin, snowlight and chandelier light meeting on her face as she answered. Yes, Karen said, and her voice carried cleanly down the hall. I will come peaceably, to Chancery, not to St. Jude's. The lead officer stiffened. The warrant names St. Jude's House. Karen stepped off the last stair and held out her hand. Then give me the warrant. He hesitated. Hale snapped. You have served it. She may read what governs her body. The officer surrendered the paper. Karen scanned it once, then pulled a pencil from the side table where household accounts were kept, and wrote across the bottom in sharp, slanted script. I, Karen Larson, submit under protest and demand direct production to Chancery at first call. Any deviation constitutes unlawful confinement before hearing, witnessed here. She signed, dated, and handed the pencil to Hale. Witness, Hale signed, Helena signed. Then Karen held the page out to the officer. Now you. That is irregular. So is kidnapping a litigant before court opens. Behind him, one of the attendants shifted uneasily. Snow blew through the half-open door. Across the street, Sir Percival's silhouette moved behind fogged glass. Karen lifted her chin and pitched her voice toward the open threshold, where 2 newspaper men already lurked like crows. "Let it be noted that I am not ill, not fleeing, and not consenting to private confinement. I go under protest to answer in open court." The reporters were writing before she finished. The lead officer swore softly, then signed. "Very well," he muttered. "Direct to Chancery." Percival's carriage door opened. Ashcombe moved 1 step onto the threshold, not touching Karen, simply blocking the line between Percival and the house with the calm menace of a drawn blade. Percival froze, glared, and slammed his door shut. Karen took Helena's arm, then paused. "Mr. Officer, I ride in my own carriage with my counsel and Lady Helena. You may follow." He looked at the reporters, at Ashcombe, at the warrant now marked by 4 signatures. Done. By the time their carriage turned toward Westminster, half London would know she had refused to disappear quietly. The Chancery Court was already packed when Karen entered. Solicitors shoulder to shoulder, clerks perched with inkstands ready, ladies pretending to faint at impropriety while leaning forward for every word. Wet wool and sealing wax and breath steamed under the high windows. Lady Larson sat at petitioner's table in perfect widow's black veil pinned with jet, expression composed into noble grief. Sir Percival beside her wore polished boots, a pale cravat, and an air of injured reason. Dr. Harrow waited behind them, lips pursed. Vice-Chancellor Merryweather took the bench and rapped once. "Larson versus Larson with related motions on guardianship, fraud and capacity. Counsel!" Pritchard, for Lady Larson, rose smoothly. "My lord, this matter concerns a vulnerable young woman manipulated by hostile interests. We seek temporary protective custody and enforcement of a debt settlement instrument she signed." Hale stood. "My lord, respondent contests every material claim and moves to dismiss emergency detention as abuse of process." Merryweather held up a hand. "Before rhetoric consumes the clock, where is Miss Larson?" Karen rose at council table. Every head turned. "Here, my lord," she said, "able to speak for myself." Pritchard's smile tightened. "The lady's presence is unfortunate, but understandable under coercive circumstances." "Coercive," Karen said before Hale could stop her. "I arrived under a dawn warrant to be sent to a madhouse before hearing. I wrote my protest on that warrant. The serving officer signed it." A low ripple passed through the gallery. Merryweather frowned. "Bring me that warrant." It was handed up. The judge read, brows lifting at Karen's annotation and signatures. "Who authorised transfer to St. Jude's before today's call?" Pritchard bowed. "Night magistrate on medical advice." "From Dr. Harrow?" Merryweather asked. Harrow inclined his head. "In my professional judgment, the respondent shows oppositional instability." "Oppositional instability," Karen repeated. "Is that your diagnosis for women who answer questions with facts?" "Miss Larson," Hale murmured. But Merryweather leaned forward, interested despite himself. "Facts, then. You claim fraud. Show me." Karen felt the old fear surge. Ballroom lights, laughter, no air. But this time she had paper in her hands and the room in front of her. Not above her. She stood. "My lord, with leave, I wish to read a codicil executed by my father, Captain Henrik Larson, witnessed by Charles Bentinck, then Senior Admiralty Clerk." Pritchard rose sharply. "Object, document authenticity disputed." Hale held up the sealed receipt. "Original tendered to registry under seal yesterday, with transfer receipt and chain of custody. We request opening in court." Merryweather nodded to the registrar. The seal was broken, the codicil was unfolded. Karen took it, hands steady. She read each line clearly, letting no one rush her. Trust in her sole name, vesting terms, explicit prohibition on alienation by guardian, spouse, or creditor through marriage bargain. By the time she finished, even the back benches had gone quiet. Pritchard recovered first. If genuine, it limits transfer of shares, not debt enforcement against person. Karen turned to him. Then let us discuss debt. She placed 3 ledgers on the evidence table. These are underwriter receipts and doc reconciliation tables from North Baltic and grant consolidated copies. The debts Lady Larson claims remained open in March were settled 2 years earlier. She flipped to marked pages. Entry 47B, paid. Entry 52C, paid. Winter timber lien discharged after insurer payout. Full amount, date stamped. Pritchard shrugged. Copies, commercial scribble. Then call Mr. Finch, Hale said. A compact, ink-stained clerk stepped forward, bowed, and adjusted spectacles. I am registrar of mercantile inks and paper marks for the City Exchange. Hale handed him Lady Larson's instrument. Examine page 3, marriage clause. Finch did, then asked for the magnifier. Ink differs from signatures above. Higher copper content, greener oxidization. Not same batch, not same season. Also paper watermark on clause leaf is Bell and Sons. Mill run introduced 11 months after date, printed on instrument. Murmurs broke into open noise. Pritchard snapped, Speculation! Finch looked offended. Chemistry? Hale, and the signatures? Finch, Miss Larson's signature appears genuine, but pressure inconsistent on adjoining initials, suggesting page replacement under existing signature panel. Lady Larson half rose. Lies! Bought lies! Merriweather rapped hard. Sit down, madam. Pritchard pivoted fast. Even if alterations occurred, Miss Larson's behaviour proves incapacity. Is incapacity. Your profession should fear is incapacity. Your profession should fear mirrors. A cough of startled laughter escaped the gallery. The judge silenced it, but not before the point landed. Hale called Constable Reed, who testified to serving the dawn warrant, seeing Sir Percival waiting with closed carriage and receiving no urgency beyond petitioner affidavit. Dr. Niazi then gave her dissent. Miss Larson is lucid, strategic, and in full command of reasoning. Impaired submissive judgment is not a medical disorder. Pritchard, now sweating, made one last play. My lord, we have 2 gentlemen who heard Miss Larson accept Sir Percival's suit months ago. Card club men paid in markers, Karen said. Ask them where the conversation occurred. One will say White's, the other Boodle's. I was at sea offices that week. Doc rolls show it. Hale produced the roll book. Dates, times, signatures, not one evening free. Pritchard sat down hard. Merriweather looked over the bench, expression gone stony. Lady Larson, stand! She rose slowly, fury cracking through her polish. You petitioned guardianship over an adult based on altered debt papers, sought pre-hearing confinement, and advanced a marriage security clause expressly barred by codicil, Merriweather said. Do you deny knowledge? Lady Larson lifted her chin. I deny nothing except ingratitude. I saved that household. I bore debts not mine. This girl would have had us all ruined by stubborn pride. Karen met her eyes. You were willing to sell me to keep your drawing room. I was willing to do what women must, Lady Larson hissed. Men settle, women survive. Not by auctioning daughters. The judge's gavel struck. Enough. I find the debt marriage instrument void for fraud and unlawful consideration. Petition for guardianship denied with prejudice. Emergency detention order vacated and referred for inquiry. Respondent Karen Larson is restored immediate legal control over her person and estate interests, subject only to existing trust terms, free of petitioner interference. He turned to the clerk. Transmit papers on suspected forgery and registry tampering to Crown Office. Censure entered against petitioner and Dr. Harrow for abusive process. Costs to petitioner and co-petitioner done. A stunned beat. Then the room erupted. Lady Larson did not collapse. She fought. As officers moved near her table, she drew herself to full height and said in a voice bright with desperation, "My lord, I demand appeal and immediate injunction against transfer of Larson shares pending inquiry into this fabricated codicil." Merryweather, already standing, sat again. "On what grounds?" "On grounds that she is vindictive and incompetent to administer trade." Karen felt the old reflex flinch, go silent, then rejected it. "With leave," she said. The judge nodded. Karen stepped out from counsel table to the centre well of court. "My lord, petitioner has argued incompetence repeatedly. I request one final exhibit, household account books from the Larson residence for the last 2 years, currently in petitioner possession," Pritchard barked. "Irrelevant." "Relevant to management," Hale said, catching up instantly. "Petitioner placed competence in issue." Merryweather considered. "Do you have them?" Lady Larson hesitated a fraction too long. "At home." "Produce within the hour," said the judge. "Court will stand in recess." 48 minutes later, winded footmen delivered 2 account ledgers, bound in cracked green leather. Karen knew them by sight. She had balanced them by candle stubs while everyone slept. She opened to the winter quarter and laid the book before the bench. "Petitioner claims she preserved household solvency," Karen said. "Here she records wages paid to 7 dismissed servants for months after dismissal. Names are copied from old payroll, signatures forged in one hand. Here she bills my mother's pianoforte as firewood salvage, while sale proceeds were never entered. Here she charges Sir Percival's gaming debt as dock entertaining." Merryweather turned pages, face darkening. Pritchard made a weak sound. "Clerical errors." "Then many," Karen said, "and always in petitioner's favour." Lady Larson lunged verbally now, composure gone. "You little viper, I fed you, clothed you. You starved me for obedience. I gave you purpose. You gave me chores and called it gratitude." Sir Percival rose, trying to detach himself. "My lord, whatever misunderstandings between ladies, I cannot be held liable for private domestic books." Hale smiled without warmth. "You signed reimbursement entries as recipient. Shall I read them?" Percival blanched. "Those signatures could be copied." "Like marriage clauses," Karen said. The gallery laughed outright this time. Then came the final crack. Registrar Penfold, recalled under oath, admitted his overnight audit had found unauthorised access to Larson probate packet 2 months earlier under a visitor pass issued to Lady Larson's steward, with Dr. Harrow as professional confirmer of family necessity. Harrow sputtered, "I merely accompanied to a sealed will archive." Merryweather's tone went glacial. "Physicians now curate probate." There was no path left. Lady Larson's fury collapsed into something uglier, naked panic. "You cannot strip me," she whispered. "I have no settlement but this." Karen heard it, and heard beneath it every bruise hidden under gloves, every command delivered as duty. Compassion flickered, brief and useless. "You had a settlement," Karen said quietly. "You chose greed." Merryweather issued supplemental orders, immediate injunction against petitioners' access to Larson accounts, appointment of a neutral trustee to audit past disbursements, restriction of Lady Larson to a fixed allowance pending outcome, referral of Sir Percival's claims to debt court. Harrow's medical recommendations were barred from future guardianship petitions, without corroboration. This time, when the gavel fell, it sounded less like threat than closure. Outside Chancery, snow had turned to cold rain. Reporters swarmed. Carriages jammed the lane. Somewhere a woman cheered, then pretended she had coughed. Hale tried to steer Karen through, but questions struck from every side. "Miss Larson, did you truly write your own defence? Is it proper for a lady to challenge physicians? Will the Duke marry you now?" Karen stopped under the courthouse portico, rain beading on the stone balustrade. "It is proper," she said, "for any person not to be sold. If that is scandal, let scandal improve." She did not answer the marriage question. Inside a retiring room, the adrenaline finally dropped. Her hands began to shake in earnest. Helena closed the door, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and wordlessly pressed a cup of hot tea into her palms. "You were magnificent," Helena said. "I was furious," Karen whispered. "Sometimes that is the same thing." Ashcombe stood near the doorway, wet coat dark at the shoulders, watching her as if ensuring she was real and still here. He had spoken only when called, testified to custody and discovery, and returned to silence the instant she resumed, exactly as asked. Karen met his eyes over the cup. "Thank you for not rescuing me." His mouth shifted. "You did not require rescue." "No." She drew breath, feeling the truth settle into bone. "I required witnesses." In the corridor, raised voices flared. Lady Larson swept past the open door between two clerks, veil askew, face stripped of social varnish. "This is not over," she snapped when she saw Karen. "You think a ruling makes you safe? Society remembers." Karen set down her cup and stood. "Then let society remember accurately." Lady Larson flinched as if struck, then turned away. A minute later, Sir Percival hurried by in the opposite direction and was intercepted at the stair by two hard-faced men Karen recognised from city circles, creditors. One caught Percival's sleeve, the other asked, all politeness and knives, when payment long promised from Larson's settlement proceeds might be expected now that those proceeds had evaporated. Reached the carriage, she leaned back against worn leather and closed her eyes. Not in collapse, in release. The city outside was the same wet, merciless London it had always been. Yet one thing had changed irrevocably. When men spoke her name tonight, they would have to attach her words to it. 3 weeks later, Karen arrived at Ashcombe House at 7 by the hall clock for supper, at Helena's insistence, and discovered by the suspicious absence of Helena that she had been outmanoeuvred. A single table had been laid in the small library dining room. 2 settings, plain silver, no guests. Firelight warmed the dark shelves. Rain tapped softly at the windows, a gentler echo of that courthouse day. Ashcombe rose when she entered. No uniform of command tonight, only a dark coat, no decorations, hair less severe than usual. He looked unexpectedly uncertain. "My sister has abandoned us to strategy," Karen said. "She claimed a headache," he said dryly. "I suspect conspiracy." Karen sat. "Then we are both trapped." "Shall I call witnesses?" She smiled despite herself. "Proceed without." Dinner began with harmless topics: Helena's latest charitable feud, Hale's triumphant fury, Tom the footman's recovery. He now carried trays like state secrets. But the old current under the conversation grew harder to ignore. Ashcombe set down his glass. "I owe you words I have delayed," he said. "May I speak plainly?" "Please." He folded his hands once, then let them open on the table. "I have wanted you since before I understood what wanting meant in this case. Not simply desire, though that too, but admiration, respect, the aggravating wish to hear your mind on every matter from dock insurance to badly written editorials. I tried to bury it because power has made too many men think wanting entitles them." Karen stayed very still. He continued, voice rougher now. "When I carried you from that ballroom, part of me was furious at them. Part was terrified of myself. I feared becoming another man who decides for a woman and calls it protection. So I kept distance until distance became cruelty." "It did hurt," Karen said softly. "I know." He met her gaze squarely. "I am sorry, not as performance, as fact." Silence stretched, warm and taut. "I was afraid too," Karen admitted. "Not of you exactly. Of needing anyone. Of waking one morning and finding gratitude had become a chain again." His expression changed. Pain, recognition. "Has anything I've done since made that fear smaller?" She considered honestly. "Yes, because when it mattered, you stood where I asked, not where your rank preferred." He exhaled as if he'd been holding that breath for weeks. He rose, came around the table and stopped at a respectful distance, leaving the space hers to close or keep. "I do not ask for gratitude," he said. "I ask for a chance. Courtship first. Public, proper and slow enough for trust to grow in daylight. If later you wish marriage, I will be the most grateful man in England. If you do not, I will still thank God I knew you." A faint, incredulous laugh escaped her. "That is an outrageously reasonable proposal. I rehearsed less reasonable versions and discarded them." She looked up at him, the man who had once spoken like steel and now offered uncertainty without disguise. "I have terms," she said. His brow lifted. "Name them." "I keep my work, my office, my apprentices, my accounts. I am not a decorative duchess in waiting." "Agreed." "You do not make decisions for me in the name of love." "Agreed," a beat. "You may still make appalling decisions about tea quality." "I intend to." She stood now, closing half the distance. "And one more term." "Yes?" "When fear makes you retreat behind ice, you tell me. You do not disappear while pretending it is noble." He swallowed. "Agreed. One reciprocal term." "Go on." "When anger drives you to carry the world alone, you tell me. You do not mistake partnership for surrender." She held his eyes. "Agreed." For a moment neither moved. Then Karen placed her hand in his. No grabbing, no claim. Just fingers finding fingers. Deliberate and equal. "Then yes," she said. "Court me." Something in him broke into light. Relief so pure it was almost boyish. He lifted her hand slowly and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, then looked up as if asking with his eyes. She answered by stepping closer. His kiss was careful at first, reverent almost, until she made a small, impatient sound, and he laughed against her mouth, tension dissolving into warmth and hunger, and a tenderness that did not feel like weakness. When they parted, both were breathless. From the corridor came a very deliberate cough in Helena's unmistakable register, followed by retreating footsteps and faintly chuckling. Karen rested her forehead briefly against Ashcombe's shoulder and laughed outright. "Witnesses," she murmured. "Indispensable," he said. Spring came to the river in brown water and bright wind. On a clear morning in April, Karen stood on the upper floor of a renovated counting house overlooking Larsen Dock. The old signboard had been repainted, Larsen Accounts and Apprentice Office. Director K.E. Larsen. Inside, 6 desks stood in 2 neat rows. At 3 of them sat girls with ink-stained fingers and fierce concentration. Elsie Reed, Constable Reed's niece, Martha Havers, daughter of the man who had once looked away in the ballroom, and Jane Dunn, No relation to Sir Percival, she had specified immediately and with heat. Karen moved between desks, correcting a column here, praising a tidy reconciliation there. "Remember," she told them, tapping Martha's page, "if totals charm you too quickly, re-add. Fraud loves haste." Tom, promoted to junior clerk, entered with a bundle of letters and a look of solemn importance. "Miss Larson, shipment abstracts from Hull. Also, Mrs. Dalrymple sent buns, and says if we skip luncheon, she'll report us to Lady Helena." "An excellent threat," Karen said. "Set them there." At noon, she walked to the quay where a small crowd had gathered. Dockworkers, wives, curious children. Hale stood with subscription papers. Helena with a ribboned ledger. "Of non-controlling shares as promised, of non-controlling shares as promised. 3-year terms, account training and legal literacy included." A murmur of surprise, then applause rough as rope. Mr. Havers stepped forward awkwardly, cap in hand. "Miss Larson, I should have spoken that night." Karen regarded him a long second. "Then speak now. Send your daughter on time, and don't tell her numbers aren't for girls." He flushed. "Aye, miss." That same afternoon, Karen crossed paths with Lady Larson at a posting inn on the Bath Road. The widow stood beside trunks reduced by half, arguing with a trustee's clerk over allowance vouchers. "You cannot expect me to live on this," Lady Larson snapped. "It is what the court allows, madam," the clerk said. Lady Larson saw Karen and went still. For an instant old contempt flashed. Then weariness swallowed it. "You have made your point," she said. Karen answered evenly, "No, the court made it. I simply stopped hiding yours." Lady Larson turned away first, climbed into the coach and pulled the curtain. 2 streets over, outside a St. James's Club, Sir Percival's lacquered carriage was being inventoried by bailiffs, while he protested in increasingly shrill tones that temporary liquidity issues were not insolvency. One bailiff removed the crest plate with practical finality. By evening, Karen returned to her own house, small, efficient, full of ledgers and fresh bread, and a pianoforte she had bought back from a broker who had underpriced it. She opened the instrument, played 2 halting lines from memory, and laughed when she missed a chord. A knock sounded. "Romance," he said, offering the reports. "Romance," he said, offering the reports first. She took them with mock solemnity. "You do know me." Later, after supper, they walked through the old Larson ballroom, now emptied of auction drapery, waiting to be converted into a public lecture room for merchant apprentices. Chandeliers still hung above, but tonight no gavel rose beneath them, no hands gripped her wrist behind lace. Karen paused at the centre floor, listening to the quiet. Her father's lesson came back, not as warning now, but as inheritance. Keep your dignity where no one can pawn it. She turned to Ashcombe, to the open doors, to the life she had chosen with both hands, and stepped forward,